Okay, so today we are going to start talking about the functions of the spinal cord. Okay, and there are three main ones, and those are conduction, locomotion, and reflexes. So conduction deals with the bundles of fibers passing information up and down the spinal cord, connecting different levels of the trunk with each other and with the brain. So conducting signals. Locomotion refers to walking, which is repetitive and deals with coordinated actions of several different muscle groups depending on exactly what you're doing. And essential pattern generators. Those are pools of neurons providing control of flexors and extensors that cause alternating movements of the lower limbs. Again, walking, running, bending, stretching, right? That's all part of locomotion. And then we have reflexes, and these are involuntary, stereotyped responses to stimuli, which would be an example of if you touch something that is hot and you pull away, right? It is the withdrawal of the hand from a painful source. It involves the brain, spinal cord, and the peripheral nerves to do that, to cause this reflex. There are three things involved. So the spinal cord is a cylinder of nervous tissue that arises from the brainstem at the foramen magnum of your skull. It passes through the vertebral canal. The inferior margin ends at your lumbar 1 or a little bit after. It averages 1.8 centimeters thick and about 45 centimeters in length. It occupies the upper 2/3 of the vertebral canal. It gives rise to 31 pairs of spinal nerves. The first pair passes between the skull and C1, which is your cervical one, and the rest pass through the intervertebral foramina, which are little spaces within each of your vertebrae. Segment refers to the part of the spinal canal supplied by each part of spinal nerves. So you have different segments. There are longitudinal grooves on the anterior and posterior sides, and these are the anterior median fissure and the posterior median sulcus. Your spinal cord can be divided into different regions. They are the cervical, thoracic, lumbar, and sacral. And as you know, those coordinate with the different sections of your vertebral column, your bones, right? So two areas of the cord are thicker than anywhere else. There is a cervical enlargement, which is the nerves to your upper limbs, your arms. And there is a lumbar enlargement, which are the nerves to the pelvic region and lower limbs. There is something called the medullary cone, and this is where the cord tapers to a point inferior to the lumbar enlargement. And then there is the quadra echina, and if you know what that means, it means horsetail, basically, which is a bundle of nerve roots that occupy the vertebral column from lumbar 2 to sacral 5. Your spinal cord has meninges. Meninges are basically three fibrous connective tissue membranes that enclose the brain and the spinal cord. They separate the soft tissue of the nervous system from the bones of the cranium and the vertebral column. And there are different layers. So from superficial to deep, they are the dura mater, the arcuate mater, and the pia mater. So the dura mater is basically, it forms a loose-fitting sleeve around the spinal cord. It is the dural sheath. It is tough It is a collagenous membrane surrounded by epidural space that is filled with fat, blood vessels, and loose connective tissue. And this is actually where they put the epidural anesthesia if you have ever had a child. If you don't want to feel the pain, sometimes you get the epidural shot. And this is actually where it's going, into the epidural space. The arachoid mater is basically the middle layer, and there is a membrane here, and that is a layer of simple squamous epithelium lining the dura mater and a loose mesh of collagenous and elastic fibers spanning the gap between the arachoidinoid membrane and the pia mater. There is also a sub-arachoidinoid space, and this is the gap between the membrane and the pia mater. And this is filled with cerebral spinal fluid, which is sometimes abbreviated CSF. There is also a lumbar cistern, which is the sub-arachoidinoid space inferior to the medullary cone that contains the quadra equina, which was, remember, the horsetail, and the CSF. And lastly, we have the pia mater. This is a delicate, translucent membrane that follows the contours of the spinal cord. There's several different parts to it. The terminal phylum, which is a fibrous strand of pia mater that extends beyond the medullary cone within the lumbar cistern. There's the coccygeal ligament. This is formed from fusion of the terminal phylum and dura mater, and it anchors the cord and the meninges to the vertebrae. And there is the dentrucolate ligaments, and these extend through the arachoid to the dura. This anchors the spinal cord to limit your side-to-side movement. You don't want your spinal cord moving around per se. Here is a picture showing you everything I just mentioned. So you have the bone, and then within the bone you have all these different meninges, and within that you have the spinal cord. So you have all these meninges basically to protect the cord, and then the bone is the overall protector of the meninges and the cord. Makes sense, right? You can see the fat that we talked about there at the top. It's kind of yellow, and you've got all different things going on. Everything we just mentioned, packed into this little tiny space. This is a picture of a child with spina bifida, and that is a congenital defect in which one or more vertebrae fail to form a complete vertebral arch for enclosure of the spinal cord. And this happens in about 1 out of 1,000 children. And it is common usually in what's called the lumbosacral region, which is the lower portion of your vertebral column. And this can be caused from a lack of folic acid when you are pregnant. So sometimes if you've had a child or you know someone who has had a child, obviously your diet is very important, but that is partly because you need folic acid, which is a B vitamin. And if you don't get enough of it, this could happen. It has to do with the development of the fetus, and without this folic acid, we can see sometimes spina bifida being the effect of it. So this is a cross-sectional view of the spinal cord, again with everything that we've kind of mentioned. And then we have some different types of matter. We have gray matter and white matter. So basically the central area of the gray matter is shaped like a butterfly, and is surrounded by 3 columns of white matter. The gray matter is composed of neuron cell bodies with just a little bit of myelin. And this is the site of information processing and synaptic integration. The white matter contains a lot of myelinated axons, hence why it's white, because myelin takes on a whitish color. And the white matter carries signals from one part of the central nervous system to another. So you have the gray matter and the white matter. So the spinal cord has a central core of gray matter that looks like a butterfly, or maybe an H if you have a cross section, and you can see it here in the picture. It does look like a butterfly. It has a pair of posterior or dorsal horns. It has a posterior or dorsal root of spinal nerve that carries only sensory fibers. There are a pair of thicker anterior, or what we say ventral horns. There is an anterior ventral root of spinal nerve that carries only motor fibers. There is a gray commissure which connects the right and the left sides. It is punctured by a central canal lined with epidermal cells and filled with central cerebral spinal fluid. And then you have a lateral horn, and this is visible from the thoracic 2 through lumbar 1 vertebrae. And this contains neurons of sympathetic nervous system. Okay. The white matter basically surrounds the gray matter, and this consists of bundles of axons that course up and down the cord. They provide avenues of communication between different levels of the central nervous system. There are columns, and there are 3 pair of these white matter bundles: the posterior, dorsal, lateral, and anterior or ventral columns on each side. And then we have tracts or fasciculi, which are subdivisions of each column. And that brings us to the end of the first lecture. I just wanted to introduce you to the spinal cord and talk a little bit about what you're going to find there and the different types of matter. Please let me know if you have any questions.